This is episode, I believe, 9 of the Living in the Punkdemic. So, took a day off yesterday, got a lot done in terms of housework and that kind of deal. So, got my longest run-in so far, which I'm happy with. Of course, keeping exactly 2 kilometers from my house at all times. Please don't arrest me. So, this time around, I'm going to be doing another, in this case, developmental kind of video. The difference this time being that I actually did some research beforehand. So I might end up doing more along these lines and maybe not do every day and do every second day instead, and just do some of these more developmental, more mental health focused stuff. From what I can tell, people seem a bit more interested in that. I'll still be playing music at the end, of course, but yeah, so I think I'll probably be doing more like this in future. So today's topic is 2 things. It's your locus of control and uncertainty as a topic, and both of these have important ramifications at the moment. I don't want to link everything I'm doing with the situation at the moment, because I feel like people also want to break from that, and I'm getting to the point now where if people are making jokes about coronavirus, then I'm starting to just like glaze over. So I'm gonna do my best to avoid it, but at the same time, in terms of making sure that we're effectively coping with and dealing with the world that we're living in at the moment is really important. So it's kind of unavoidable in this case. And with the new, with the situation both bringing up new issues for people as well as exacerbating or having the potential to exacerbate existing conditions, means that this is a really important time for having focus and being aware of mental health topics and how to deal with them. So I think I'm going to be doing more stuff along this lines. This today is partially there's chunks of it that you could implement today if you were so inclined, and then others is more kind of medium to long-term developmental kind of stuff. So you can pick and choose whatever sounds good to you and ignore the rest if you want. And of course, even though I'm doing a bit more research-oriented stuff, and there have often been like studies in a really generic term that I cite sometimes without any actual backing, and I'm going to try and stop myself from doing that from now on, because there's one I was trying to find today, which I've cited several times and could not find anywhere. I think it's still useful as a thought experiment, but if I can't find anything about it, then I'm not going to keep saying it, because that's not great science. So, let's start with locus of control. So, some of you might already know what this is. So, locus of control is basically, it's how you perceive events, the source of events happening. How would I put this? It's basically where you place the cause of the events in your life. Whether the main kind of distinction that's made with locus control is internal versus external locus of control, where if you have an internal locus of control, and this may not be true for all situations, but so let's say you have an internal locus of control, it means that you believe that the world around you is, at least in part, shaped by your actions. So the events that happen to you are caused by you. And vice versa, an external locus control is you believe the world around you is causing the things that are happening to you. And that might sound obvious. Of course, that you don't have control over everything. But it's more how you apply this to your everyday life situations and the outcomes of the things that you do. So, so maybe, maybe it's easiest to work at an example. Of course it is. What am I doing? Sorry. Slightly scatterbrained today. I'm not used to the more structured stuff, so I'm sure I'll get more comfortable with it over time. So anyway, as an example of this, if you did an exam and you get the results back from your exam. Now, it might seem to some people maybe that obviously the results in your exam are about you. It's whatever you did, because depending on what you put down in that paper, that's the result you got. So believing that my exam results are, and as with most psychological concepts, not everything is a discrete box. You can be on different kind of spectrum in terms of internal versus external. So let's say you're an extreme internal, you're like, my exam result came purely from my own actions and the decisions I made. So let's say I studied a lot. So I did well because I studied a lot. And there we go. Cool. And then externally, you could look at that exam result and go, no, that teacher's a dick. They mark really hard. They didn't tell us all the things that we needed to know for it. That was unfair. It was loud in the lecture hall at the time. It made it hard for me to concentrate. There's 100,000 factors that you could point out that were the result of you getting a bad result. But it doesn't just work for bad outcomes. It can go for good outcomes too, where you can explain away positive things that happen, where if you get a good grade, you could go like, oh no, I just got lucky that the right things came up that I happened to be studying for. That going the opposite way, the lecture is just a really nice marker. I'm not actually that good at that subject. This kind of thing. So hopefully you have an idea of how at least the internality versus externality locus of control works. And that's the main line. And I'm just gonna, before I move on to the other elements of locus of control, I'm gonna do. You might ask, well, what's the point of this? So a lot of research has been conducted looking at the outcomes of internal versus external locus of control with, as you might guess, internal locus of control resulting in much better outcomes in a lot of different areas. So having an external locus of control is connected with career performance, your general well-being and affect, so how happy you are, as well as how much you enjoy your job, as well as the performance, academic performance, and motivation. And then on the flip side, having an external locus of control is connected with a lot of negative psychological outcomes, such as depression, anxiety, particularly, and now this isn't true across all cultures, but for Western cultures like ourselves, it does have a pretty significant impact. I think like a 30% increase in likelihood of depression for external locus people with external locus control, and then for more collectivized cultures, it is like 10%. I'm going into way too much depth. I'll figure out the line to work with this at some point. But anyway, so it is important. It makes a big difference to your just how much you enjoy, how happy you are, how well you do. It might sound like one of those business self-help kind of things where if you fix this one thing, then everything will be good forever. But as much as I would distrust or debunk a lot of those kind of things, in this case, it is really important, and it does make a pretty huge difference to your life. And I can talk about this as someone who went from having an external locus of control to having an internal locus of control. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I made that shift a little bit later. So before we get to that, there's just a couple more dimensions that have been kind of identified in terms of locus of control. So while you can have internal versus external, it's possible to have an internal locus of control about something that you still it's still not good, because the controllability is also an element where you can, for example, you can believe, oh yeah, no, I did well in that exam because I'm smart, but that's not me. That's a thing I don't have control over, or vice versa. I didn't do well in that maths exam because I'm bad at maths, which is, again, not in your control. It's internal, but it's not something you can control. So in those cases where you feel below control, even if it is internal, it will still have the same effect as being external. And then there's the short versus long-term factors. So whether you believe that the outcome was the result of things you did recently or things you did over a longer period of time. And those aren't as clear-cut, like good or bad. Not that... Well, I don't like saying anything is good or bad in psychology, but certainly the outcomes are better for internal locus of control. So good is an oversimplification, but sure, whatever. So yeah, with short and long term, it really just depends on what you're talking about as to whether it's better for you to believe that the outcome came from short or medium or long-term factors. So how did I change mine? So I had an external locus of control, and well, a combination of external locus of control, and then for the things that were internal, low or no controllability. So I use the example of what I did before, where, like, if I did good in things, it wasn't because I put in effort, it was just because I could do that thing. And on the flip side, I convinced myself I was bad at languages, apart from English, so I had no interest in French or Irish, and I just put zero effort into them because I had the belief that I'm bad at those. So just never put any work in, and I've never learned the language since. That's partly because of teachers, and those definitely have an influence on it. And there's outside factors. Your developmental history definitely has a huge impact on how your locus of control is formed. But yeah, so I had those, and then I had just external factors of just blaming the world around me for the things that happened to me, basically, or the bad things that happened to me, and finding it difficult to take credit for the good things. So yeah, how did I change this? So before I go into how I changed it, there's important things to note here, which is to be able to do any of this, you need to first be aware and accept that you have the ability to change. And this is something that kind of has been pushed by a lot of different kind of angles. I know Buddhism has a lot on kind of the capacity for change and the impact that you have on the world around you. So recently with advances in neuroscience and neuroimaging, they've found that neuroplasticity, which is basically how much your synapses and like mental connections can alter over time, is really huge. You can basically rewrite all of the pathways in your mind to some degree. Not all, and maybe you won't be able to get all of them done in your lifetime, but you have almost complete potential to change the way your mind is made up. And it's difficult in a lot of cases. It's not easy to change the way your mind works. It's a kind of gradual process over time mostly, but simply, or at least for me, simply the knowledge that you have, or I have that potential and that ability is really comforting, because it means that even the things that haunt me now or have haunted me in the past aren't forever and don't have to be forever if I work on them and if I am able to get through them, which kind of time after time for me, I have found that I have been able to do that. And it's so it's maybe a bigger topic for another time, but that's the baseline buy-in, that you need to believe that before you can do any of this. So I'm going to just assume you do. So with that, there's things you can do. The most important one for locus control for me was to focus on what I am actually able to affect and control, and don't worry about the rest. Might sound simple, and it might sound like one of those things where they're just told, why don't you just be happy? But it's, or at least for me, it was like an awareness of it to then, from once I kind of got that knowledge, I forget where I got it from, I then, with everything, kind of made judgments on it, where it's like, is this something that I control? No. Then I'm not going to worry about it. And put everything into the categories of like, can I control it? If I can, okay, what can I do? And what should I do? If I can't control it, it's out of my hands. What am I going to do? Like, I might plan ahead for the worst case scenario with it, but I'm not going to give it any more thought than that. And that's not like anticipating the worst. That's just having a backup plan so that I'm comfortable with the worst. If it comes to that, then I know that I can deal with it. And having like at least some forward planning means that I feel more comfortable that I can deal with it. So this is huge, and yeah, it's really freeing. So an example with this is like when I finish an exam, I'm not worried at all about my exam results or the results of my anything, because once I've finished an exam or once I've submitted an essay, until the point that it gets back to me, I have zero ability to influence anything with that anymore. Like it's done. It is out of my control. Whatever I get, I get. And I'm very comfortable with things like that. Like it's, if I know, okay, this awful thing could happen, and even if I'm given the like, this threat is made conscious to me, I'll note it, and it's important information all the time if it's a threat. And then I will just leave it there and deal with it, and then leave it. So yeah, so that's the most important one for sure. It's focusing on what you can actually control, and that will automatically kind of shift your control internally, because now you're not like fighting against these impossible tasks and trying to rewrite things beyond your power and then just cursing the world for it. Now you're going, okay, well, this sucks, and like the situation I'm in sucks. But instead of just focusing and dwelling on, okay, this situation is terrible, I instead work on what can I do to make this better, even if it's only a tiny increment. And that's something that's also really important that I really want to push is the importance of valuing incremental advances when it comes to mental health and developmental kind of stuff, because those are the really important thing. And if you note and celebrate all your small shifts forward, it makes it so much easier to keep going, and it makes it and those small incremental changes are super important. And every time I note them, I'm like super happy. And even when I get setbacks, I know that this isn't permanent, and it's important to see those as learning opportunities, which is the next point on this. The perfect transition of me talking absolute shit for a while and then going into my next point. This is definitely the in-between between my unstructured rambles and having points written on a street over here. But yeah, so the next bit is that, and this is something that I will probably do a full video on some point, but it's the growth mindset, which was kind of identified and then like categorized and named by Carol S. Dweck, I believe her name is, and she has an excellent book on it called Growth, I think, the growth mindset, maybe. But anyway, so it's basically the idea that you, like I said with the neuroplasticity stuff, you always have the opportunity to grow and get better at everything. And if you work from that mindset, it makes it so much easier to take criticism and to deal with setbacks, because now you're not just seeing these as like, if you move your center of value, which I had talked about before, if your self-worth isn't contingent on this, but even if it is, if you instead see this as a learning pattern where it's like, okay, I suck now. Maybe you don't suck. Maybe like I'm pretty good now, but I want to get better. And the only way to get better is to fuck up. It's to experience failure and to get comfortable with it. And again, this is verging into self-help territory, so I'm going to be careful here to not try and dissuade everyone. But yeah, it's if you see it as, I'm never going to be able to do the whole thing on growth at this point because I'll need a full video, so I'll leave that to the side. But anyway, it's basically in terms of locus of control, it's trying to see setbacks as chances to grow and learn and to use them and not get destroyed by them. Makes a big difference to being able to, because a lot of the time when you put external locus of control, sometimes it's a defense mechanism, and it's like, for example, if you do badly in an exam and you put the locus of control, your locus of control is external for that, it means that, oh, well, like it's because of this, and this. It's not because of me. So even though I'm mad and frustrated at all these other things in the world, I'm not to blame. So that it functions as a defense mechanism, and it definitely hard taking that away. And that's partially why I'm saying go for incremental advances. So yeah, before I get completely lost in this, the final point is a lot of because I was looking through how some different psychologists were talking about changing your locus of control, and one that came up a lot, but again, can kind of fall into the category of just be happy, is your self-talk. So I got this during my time of like, just like don't talk shit to yourself. It is a really hard thing to do because these are automatic negative thoughts. Negative automatic thoughts, or whatever you want to call them, which is something that's worked on in CBT. So because they're automatic, it means that they're going to pop up even if you tell them not to, and most of the time, especially if you tell them not to, like trying not to think of the elephant. And so because of that, when I was told, like, oh, you need to stop thinking these kind of things, it meant that whenever they did pop up, not only did I feel whatever negative thing they were telling me, but then I also felt bad for feeling that thing. So it just kind of piled on top of each other. And it's why, like, in that case, it definitely got worse before it got better, which is the way in a lot of developmental stuff. So it was one way of doing it. But the important lesson that I learned with it was to be, rather than just like trying to stop them, is instead to just be aware of them and to be aware of when it is that kind of thought, when it is just your mind telling you shit that is untrue because that's the way your mental patterns work, and to be able to just put a bit less weight on it. Just go, oh, I know that's that thing. It's like, I don't want to promote people having multiple voices talking in their head, but if you can see that as just like a separate entity, which is still part of you, and to not reject it, but to recognize that that is something that's telling you things, but it's not necessarily saying things that are correct. It's not, it doesn't, it has your interests at heart because it's trying to protect you by telling you all the worst shit. It sounds counterintuitive, but those are also defense mechanisms you built up over time, to, but doesn't, just because they're defense mechanisms doesn't mean they're adaptive. It doesn't mean they're good for you. So with this, you have to just try and be aware of them, and that's the first step. If you're aware of when it's that voice telling you things versus your normal self, that's the biggest first step, if you haven't already been doing that. So I'm going to stop here because this is already very long. So I was going to also talk about uncertainty, which is maybe, but I'll do that next episode, because especially with the structure, I find that it takes a bit longer to talk through all this stuff. So that will be next time. We'll be on uncertainty and management of it, and theory of management of uncertainty. So now probably only going to play one or two things, maybe, but now for the music.